Hey there, I'm Mr. Goan, and today we're going to be having a look at fraction skills. We're going to be covering everything from the basics with equivalent fractions, simplifying fractions, your top-heavy and your mixed numbers, adding and subtracting fractions, multiplying, and dividing. So, starting straight in equivalent fractions. Now, what you should know already is the names of the top number, the numerator, and the bottom number, the denominator. Now, equivalent fractions are fractions that mean the same thing. So here we've got the starting fraction of 3/5. Now, the equivalent fraction to that, or one of them, could be 6/10. If I have something that I've split up into fifths, I can cut each of those fifths in half and get the same object split into tenths. My 3/5 are the same as 6 of those original tenths. And we can see that quite easily when you've got something like our rectangle here. Now, if I split my rectangle in half, then I can color in half and I can say that that half of my rectangle is purple. Half of it's purple. Now if I split my rectangle into quarters, I'll move that slightly so it's a little more even, then now what I can say is that 2/4 is purple. It hasn't changed how much of the original shape is purple. All that's changed is my fraction. But you can see that they mean the same thing. I can go even further. I can split these again. And now you can see that 4/8 of my shape is purple. Now, with all of those, one rule that we can have, and one rule I'm hoping you can see, is to get from one fraction to another fraction, what we're doing is multiplying the top number and the bottom number by the same thing. If I want to get from halves into eighths, I'm multiplying the top and the bottom by 4. And anytime you want to find an equivalent fraction, you need to do whatever you do to the bottom, you have to do to the top, and vice versa. So moving on, we're going to look at simplifying fractions, and that's reversing the process. Now when you work with fractions in maths, you will always be expected to give your answer in its simplest form. So if a question comes to a final answer of, let's say, 4/8, well, 4/8 can be simplified. And we know it can be simplified because we look for common factors. That's a factor that the top and the bottom share. Now we can think about this as what times table are they both in? Well, 4 and 8 are both in the 4 times table, so I can divide the top by 4, and I can divide the bottom by 4, and we know that 4/8 is the same as 1/2. Now we can do this with any fractions where the top and the bottom share a factor. So if we had even as big as something like 75/100, well, the top and the bottom both share a factor of 25. So I can divide the top by 25 and the bottom by 25. And that will give me 3/4. Now you don't always have to work in one single step. Let's take our 75/100ths for an example. If I didn't immediately spot my common factor of 25, I do know that both of those are in the 5 times table. They both end in either 5 or 0. So I can divide by 5. Now 100 divided by 5 is 20. And 75 divided by 5 is 15. And now those are numbers again that we can see are both in the 5 times table. So once again, if we divide by 5 on the top and on the bottom, we'll get to 3/4. Now the key, if we're going to do it in smaller steps, is to keep going until we can't find any more common factors. Now, if you wanted to find out what that would have been in one step, we can take each of our steps, 5 and 5 here, and we can multiply them together. 5 times 5 is 25. We could have jumped from the 100 and the 100ths to the quarters by dividing by 25. always look to see if a fraction can be simplified. Now, up next is top-heavy fractions and mixed numbers. So firstly, you might be asking, what is a top-heavy fraction? Well, a proper name for that would be an irrational fraction, or an improper fraction, sorry. And a top-heavy fraction is where the top number is bigger than the bottom number. And we get this quite often when you have, let's say you cut your pizza into halves. Okay, you're at a big pizza party and all the pizzas have been cut into halves. And let's say you took 3 big halves. Well, you would have 3 halves. Now a mixed number is a different way of saying exactly the same thing. 3 halves, well, that's the same as 1 whole pizza and 1 half a pizza. And this is the one that a lot of people say quite casually. It'll be 3.5 hours. It'll be 2 3/4 of an hour. Now we need to be able to convert between them. So to convert from a top-heavy fraction to a mixed fraction, well, let's take an example of top-heavy fraction. Let's go for our 7/5. Okay, something nice and easy. Well, really a fraction is a divide. That's really 7 divided by 5. So if we look at that as a step sum, there's our 5 standing on the steps, and here are the 7 toys under the stairs that we're going to share out. Well, how many 5s are in 7? Well, there's 1. And this is where we're going to bring our remainders back in. Now, you might not have seen remainders in division since primary school, because we normally work with decimals. But here our remainders are important. So if I take my 1 5 out of 7, I have a remainder of 2. Now that 2 tells me how many fifths I have left over. So my answer here is 1 2/5. And we can do that with bigger fractions as well. Let's say I've got 31/6. Well, I've got my division here, 31 divided by 6. So how many 6s are in 3? Well, there's none, so my 3 carries over. How many 6s are in 31? Well, there's 5 with a remainder of 1. So 31/6 is the same as 5 1/6. Now to go the other way, to convert from a mixed number to a top-heavy number, top-heavy fraction, sorry, we can choose any mixed number we have here. So let's go for 2.5. Now, what we have to remember here is that 1 whole pizza is the same as 2 halves. Okay? And that's always true with any fraction. If you have the same numerator as your denominator, that's equal to 1. So if 1 is 2 halves, then 2 must be 4 halves. And we can use this information to turn this into a top-heavy fraction. So our 2 now is 4 halves, and we had 1 half already, so that's 5 halves. Now there's a nice neat rule for this. If we have, for example, 3 2/5, what we can do is take the number on the bottom of our fraction and multiply it by the whole number on the left. So we can take our 5 and times it by 3, that's 15. Then we take our 15 and we add on the numerator of the fraction. So 15 plus 2 is 17. So 3 2/5 is 17/5. So our rule there told us that it was 5 times 3 plus our 2 from the numerator, all still over 5. And that's how we convert from a mixed number to a top-heavy number. A top-heavy fraction, sorry. Now, top-heavy fractions are important. We need to use top-heavy fractions if we're going to be multiplying or dividing, and they can make adding and subtracting easier as well. Sometimes it means that you can be working with very large numbers, but that's okay. You've got all of the paper in the world to write it down on. And sometimes it is easier just to work with a top-heavy. But you must remember, if your question gave you fractions as a mixed number, then your answer should be in a mixed number as well. So now we're going to look at adding and subtraction. Now we can add and subtract basic fractions. Now basic fractions are when we have the same denominator. So if we had 3/8 plus 2/8, you can see that the denominator is the same. What we're saying there is I've got 3 portions of something that's been cut into 8 and another 2 portions of something that's been cut into 8. So what I've got is 3 plus 2 all over 8. I have 5/8. Now explaining it makes it look a bit more complicated. Really, this makes a lot more sense, again, if you think of it in pizzas. I cut my pizza into 8 slices. I ate 3, then I ate another 2, so I have eaten 5 of the 8 slices. Now this also works with subtraction. Let's have our 5/8, and I'm going to take away 4/8. I'm going to be left with 1/8. I started with 5 slices of pizza and somebody took 4 of them. I've got 1 left. Now we can do this again with harder fractions using what we know from equivalent fractions. So let's say, throwing our pizzas back in again, let's say I cut my pizza into 8 slices and I took 1 slice of the pizza. I then took half of the original pizza and put that in my plate as well. Now how many slices is that? We've got an eighth and a half. Well, we know from our equivalent fractions that 1/2 is the same as a certain number of eighths. Now we can figure out how many eighths that is by working out what we multiplied by. What do we multiply 2 by to make 8? Well, we have to times that by 4. So if we times the bottom by 4, we have to times the top by 4. 1 times 4 is 4. So really our sum isn't an eighth plus a half, it's an eighth plus 4/8. 1 plus 4 is 5 all over 8. 5/8. And we can do that anytime you can spot an equivalent fraction that will make your addition or subtraction easier. And we can keep doing this with things like if I had a half and I wanted to take away a third. So a half take away a third. Well, we need to find an equivalent fraction. Well, we need to look for the lowest common multiple of 2 and 3. So what times table, what number, sorry, is in both the 2 and the 3 times table? Well, that would be the 6. So if I want fractions over 6, what do I times 2 by to make 6? Well, I times it by 3, so I'm going to have 3/6 minus 2/6. So 3/6 minus 2/6 is 1/6. So a half minus a third is a sixth. And that's using our lowest common multiple, or the LCM. Now another way we could do that is using what's called the smile and kiss method. Now this does sometimes result in much bigger numbers, and then we have to simplify afterwards, but it can make it easier if you're not very confident at finding lowest common multiples. So if we had something like, let's have 2/3 plus 1/6. Now, if you'd spotted the equivalency, we know that that's going to be 4/6 plus 1/6, which is 5/6. So knowing already that we're going to get an answer of 5/6, the smile and kiss method works like this. We put a smile, joining the denominators together, and a kiss that crosses like that. Now each red line here is a multiply. So on the top, I have 2 times by 6. Next, my sign comes through, so that's a plus, so we're going to put our plus in. And now I have 3 times by 1. I can then draw my line separating the numerator and denominator, and my denominator is 3 times 6. My kiss gives me the numerator, my smile gives me the denominator. Keeping that in mind, we've got 2 times 6, which is 12, plus 3 times 1, which is 3, all over 3 times 6, which is 18, and that gives us 15 over 18. Now you can see that that's not the same number, but we can simplify. Both of these are in the 3 times table. We can divide the top and the bottom by 3. And remember, I'm showing every step, and you're working, you might not need to show each of these. 15 divided by 3 is 5. 18 divided by 3 is 6. 5/6. Our equivalencies, if you spot them, can make this faster, but the smile and kiss will work every time. It just means we end up with bigger numbers that we then have to simplify. Now, the last skill that reaches up to National 4 level is multiplying fractions. Now, multiplying fractions is quite often regarded as one of the easier things you can do with fractions. We can simply say something like 1/2 times 3/8. There's two fractions that are being multiplied together. We multiply the tops together to get our new numerator. We multiply the bottoms together to get our new denominator, and then we simplify if possible. 1 times 3 is 3. 2 times 8 is 16. There's nothing we can simplify there because 16 doesn't share any factors with 3. And so that's our final answer. Now it's important to remember that in maths, the word of can often mean multiply. So if I wanted 1/4 of 2/9, really that's 1/4 times 2/9. And we can solve that. We can say 2 times 1 is 2, 4 times 9 is 36, and then we simplify because both of these are even, so we can half them both, gives us 1 over 18. So 1/4 of 2/9 is an 18th. Multiplying fractions is one of our skills that requires top-heavy numbers, top-heavy fractions. Okay? So remember, turn it into a top-heavy, then multiply. Now, our dividing fractions is the National 5 skill. I'm not 100% sure why, but it is a little bit trickier and you do need to remember it. If we want to divide two fractions, so for example, we've got 3/8 and we want to divide that by 1/2. Okay? The trick for this, we're going to take this second fraction and we're going to turn it upside down. Then we're going to turn our divide into a times. So rewriting that, we get 3 over 8 times 2 over 1. And now we just do our multiply. Times the tops together, times the bottoms together. 2 times 3 is 6. 8 times 1 is 8. 8 over 6, they share a common factor of 2, so we can simplify that to 3/4. So 3/8 divided by 1/2 is 3/4. Now that's all of our dividing skills, everything you need to use the 4 basic operators. Don't forget, new videos will get uploaded with more skills to MrGoanMaths. Have a nice day.